g'day. It's Buck here from Queer Pagan Men Australia, and I am very excited to be joined today by Casey Giovinco. Hey, Casey.
Hey, Buck.
So thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today and share a little bit about your rather unique take and journey in the craft. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in the deep end. Can you share with us a little bit about your experience and entry into paganism and witchcraft?
Sure. So, let's see. Oh gosh, I must have started looking into it when I was like 14, 15 years old. My first book was Silver Ravenwolf's Teen Witch.
Yeah.
And I read it and I like gobbled it up because here was this woman telling me that I was okay to be gay. And at the time I really was struggling with being gay. Everybody else knew I was, and I really struggled with the identity of it, and I really didn't want to admit to it. So I did absolutely everything I could to avoid it. But there was always this little needling in the back of my subconscious that was like, no, you know it's true, so get comfortable and get ready for it. So I was reading a ton of Silver's books after Teen Witch, and she just kind of spoke to me like my mom. And it made me feel really comfortable. And so one day my mom says to me, darling, I'd love you to go and get confirmed at church. I was like, oh, Jesus. So, I sat there and I thought about it for a while, and I was like, there's a lot of ways I could handle this. I know I love this Wicca thing. I know I love this pagan thing. But how do I say that to my mom without sounding crazy? So I kind of thought that through for a few minutes, and I said, okay, here's the problem with your idea. Going to go to church, and they're going to tell me that gay people are bad, and they're going to tell me that gay people are going to hell, and Mom, I'm not sure that I'm not gay, so how can I sit in church and appreciate that and not feel like a hypocrite the entire time? And so she gave me this sob story, and my mother learned how to handle me very early on. So she said, well, look, I don't know that I'm right, but if I am right and Christianity is the one true religion, and I get to go up to heaven and go to this after party, I want to know that you're there with me, or it won't feel like fun. And I was like, okay, but you admit that you don't know that you're right. And she said, no, I don't know that I'm right. I said, then I'll do it. But only if you'll accept the possibility that what I'm studying might be right. And you'll support whatever I do after that. And so she said yes. And I went through a year of confirmation and did all the stuff. I kept my promise. I did exactly what she asked me to do, what the Reverend asked me to do, who was lovely, by the way. The Reverend gave me some of the most wonderful gay-affirming information I have ever seen, bar none. Like, one of her pieces of advice was, Jesus is like a floppy disk. So I'm dating myself here, right? So Jesus is like a floppy disk. And I have a copy of him, and I read through that copy, or I interact with that copy in some way, and then I give that copy, that floppy disk, to somebody else with all of my interpretations added in. So today we would say it's like a PDF, right? And I was like, okay. And she goes, I don't think Jesus really cares. So my version of the floppy disk doesn't have all that bullshit attached to it, excuse my French. And so I was like, well, that's brilliant. I like that. I'll interact with your Jesus. That's fine. So my year of confirmation really wasn't that bad. It also really wasn't that Christian. It was a Unitarian Universalist, or UCC. I can't even remember anymore. But it was so non-denominational. It was just kind of like go there and have fun. So I did what Mom asked me to do, and I'm walking down the aisle after I've done my confirmation. And I said, Linda, grab your purse. We're going to Gary's World of Wellness. I need some witchcraft supplies. As I'm walking out of church, and she goes, what? I said, I'll tell you in the car, grab your purse. And so I walk out and I get in the car after saying hi to everybody. I go to Gary's World of Wellness, grab all the supplies, and my mom's only requirement to me was that I not conjure up anything I couldn't banish. And I was like, okay, way to hold your oath here, Linda. That's really good. So I kind of worked with it. I let her read some Silver Ravenwolf. I did some research online. I tried a few love spells. I tried a few other spells. All of them really kind of failed. But I was so attached to the concept by this point because it was so accepting of what it meant to be gay and not straight, and what it meant to be an outcast. And all of these people who I wanted to love me and I wanted acceptance from just would not do it because I was so flaming that small town America wasn't prepared for it. And so I was like, all right, fine, then the witches. So I really didn't get involved with the pagan community much further than that for about 5-10 years because I was just so invested in my own concept of spirituality as I had read it from these books. And I just fell in love with it from there.
Wow, that's really cool. And it's quite unique that you had an entry into witchcraft from the get-go, especially at a young age, that you found that gay affirmation within it as well. So
Yeah.
that's really, really unique, and that's wonderful. So through your journey then, where did you find the biggest transitions in your work and your practice in the craft, integrating more the reflection of your own gay experience in the divine?
I didn't.
Okay.
The journey on some of this stuff is really 7-8 years old max.
Okay.
So I found Wicca because I had been raped by gay men. I had suffered at the hands of gay men, and they were supposed to be my salvation. So I was like, okay, I get to come out of the closet. Here are these gay men. They're going to love me. I'm going to love them. Everybody's going to be happy. That's not how it worked. And so I sort of had to struggle with that. And like most people who go through some of that stuff, I became a little bit jaded and a little bit bitter. At the time, I was going to college in Boston, and my friends called me the Ice Queen because the joke was if you tried to get too close to me, you'd get frostbite and your dick might fall off. And so I was like, okay, that's a little odd. But I really struggled with liking gay men. And that survived, all the way through my training in Wicca until I got a 3rd degree. And then just after the 3rd degree, I had that experience with the God in my dream that I talked about in the introduction to my book. I had that experience with the God, and I called my teacher, and pretty much how I detailed it in the book is how it happened. It was like, listen, here's what's going on. This is where I'm at. What do you think about this dream? And he was like, well, I think it sounds like you really probably need to get over your stuff with gay men, and maybe you should write about that. And I was like, okay. So I ignored him for 3 to 6 months. I was really fighting it, So I ignored him for 3 to 6 months. And then I started to research some stuff with Carnunos. I started to research some stuff with the Horned God. I researched shamanism. I researched the Unnamed Path. I found so many things. And I was like, okay, none of this is feeling completely authentic for me. Because I know I'm a witch. I know I'm at the core of this. I don't want to give up what I've been training in, and I don't want to train in anything other than witchcraft at this point. But witchcraft itself is not as embracing of this as I would like on a broad spectrum. So how do I navigate that and still make it witchcraft? And so I would do my research. I would read books. I would go online. I would read people's blogs. I would study anthropological stuff. I mean, my research for figuring out my own gender identity, sexual identity, whatever you want to whatever labels you want to put on this thing, my own research for figuring out how all of that fit into what would be called gay witchcraft, I was probably 4 or 5 years of intensive study above and beyond my 3rd degree. And I just started blogging about my experience, and people started to contact me and were like, that's exactly what I'm going through. This is why I didn't join any other Wiccan groups. I love what you're saying. Can you teach me? And my teacher had a good laugh. because like he finally got what he wanted. He got me to embrace gay men. And so I did start to take on those students. And when I was teaching them traditional, not British traditional witchcraft, but traditional European witchcraft, I kind of also had to love them. Like I just fell in love with them, and they weren't gay men to me anymore. They were people. And so all of my baggage fell away, and these gay men got into my heart. And I was like, well, ain't that a thing? So it kind of was like forced on me. What's that?
Funny how that works.
Right. Yeah. So no, it really wasn't a part of the beginning stages of this.
Cool. So you've mentioned the book. So the book is Garbed in Green, Gay Witchcraft and the Male Mysteries. So jumping in to write a book, that's a big venture. What, like you do talk about the dream in the book and where that leads for you. Why this book, and what was it that you felt that you were bringing in this writing that hadn't been said before, or that needed to be shared wider?
Why this book?
Just the little questions, you know.
So this book, really thinking about how to answer you. So when I started my training with my teacher in our coven, I was also enrolled in a philosophy program at a university studying applied business and healthcare and legal ethics as a master's program, which I didn't finish because philosophy had this way of bashing the witch in order to prove its point. And I couldn't square what I was going through, and the spirituality won out because I only had so much time and so much energy. So the spirituality won out, and I let the masters fall by the wayside. But I was studying for the masters, and I got to the point where I was writing my thesis. And I was writing a thesis on the ethical value of seduction, which is where the Baudrillard chapter comes from in the book. So I was writing a thesis on the ethical value of seduction and making distinctions between manipulation and seduction. And I thought to myself, that really is the crux of this problem. Like, everybody is conflating seduction and manipulation. And it's not the same. Real love actually has a very intellectual component to it. Real engagement with people actually seduces them, and it elevates them up, whereas manipulating them knocks them down so you can control them. And so they're really not the same thing. And so I don't know if it was just that I didn't have the heart to give up the thesis or like if it actually was legitimately valid in terms of my research with this stuff, but it began the book. And my understanding of seduction really started to validate some of the things that witchcraft was teaching me. And it really kind of started to give me a different approach to how I could handle gay men and what they were going through and how they were approaching love and what struggles we have regarding finding love from somebody else who is broken or damaged or hurt or scared or afraid or just feeling unlovable. And it was fascinating to read through all of that stuff. And so I read Casanova's diaries. I read stuff about Madame de Pompadour. I read anything I could get my hands on that was seductive. And then I started to compare it against all the stuff I was learning in witchcraft. And I was realizing the whole reason people hate seduction in modern society is because they hate witchcraft. They're really the same thing. So when I started to look at what seduction and witchcraft were doing and how gay men fit into it, some stuff really started to make a lot more sense. And so I sort of got taken back by the book too. Like there was no chance I couldn't write it. It kept popping back up over the time that I was training these students, over the time that I was building my tradition, over the time that all of this other stuff was happening. This book kept needling its way back into my consciousness. So I just had to kind of give into it and write it.
Very cool. So an interesting point that I was looking for in the book and part of my own journey as, I identify as a man who loves men and trying to find find something in the craft that really spoke to me in my journey and my magic, and where I could freely use that power of my seduction, if you will, and tap into that freely as a point of power and energy within witchcraft. I was looking for ways to do that, and for a practice which really embraces that truly and could teach me how to further advance that. So during my journey, I came across a lot of books which were very much just gender swapped Wicca. Um, Simply just, keeping the whole heteronormative BS and try to just go, hey, you're just like straight people, but we'll just swap this character. Yay.
Right.
And I just kind of, you're really missing the point here, aren't you? Um, so I know that was part of my journey, and anytime I look at books or teachings, particularly for men who love men in the craft, or even queer witchcraft for that matter, I do look for those unique qualities that really speak to the truth of our unique journey, that don't just simply try and go, oh, it's okay, you're just like us, but actually go, no, fuck that, you're not, and that's okay. And here's
Yeah.
what's unique about that, and here's the magic in that, and here's what is special, and how you you work that quite differently. Now, part of what I look for in that is the binary concepts, and polarity is one which is quite interesting. And admittedly, there's been I've read your book a few times, and I, there's still times when I struggled with where where that polarity is sitting in your interpretation, and still unpacking that and exploring that, in all honesty. Could you share with us a little bit about, I know it goes into great detail in the book, but in a short little nugget, could you share with us a little bit about your take on polarity and how you work with those energies or translate that energy?
A little nugget. All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just
Um,
2 sentences should be fine, yeah?
not. So polarity seems to be a push button issue amongst everybody.
Yeah.
Like whenever you talk witchcraft, especially British traditional witchcraft or initiatory Wicca or whatever you want to call it, whenever you talk European style witchcraft, it seems to be either the thing that holds it together or the thing that completely invalidates it.
Mm.
And people are very rarely smack in the middle. So I'm very, very smack in the middle. I recognize the problematic nature of polarity when it is used as a heteronormative construct. I also recognize that just because I don't like something doesn't mean it isn't true. I hate the scale and how like heavy it tells me I am, or conversely, how light it tells me I am in different points of my cycle of working out, right?
Mhm.
But just because I'm angry at the scale doesn't mean gravity ceases to exist. So I recognize the value of what European style witchcraft is doing and why it's potent and why it works. But I also recognize that people need to be uplifted by their spirituality, and that telling them they're just like straight people, or no, you're kind of like straight people, or look, you're not at all like straight people, none of that helps. None of that's beneficial. So even if you're embracing people as like, no, there's no difference between you and anybody else in my coven, it still has a ring of heteronormativity to it where it's like, yeah, you can be here and yeah, we accept you as long as you fit into the paradigm we've accepted. And so I really struggled with that after my third degree. Now, my coven where I was taught did not do that to me. We did not get hung up on polarity. We were eminently more concerned with, is the magic successful? And if so, why? And let's look to older texts. Let's look to Civil League. Let's look to the Theosophists. Let's look to anybody who has real information as opposed to just, this makes me feel good. Let's look to the people who have done the research and find out why this is working and not pretend we know when we don't. And so that was a really open and embracing environment to be brought up as a witch in. Um, I really was genuinely surprised by the polarity debate when I came out of my little sheltered coven
Mm.
and I branched into the broader pagan community because we legitimately were not concerned with it. So when I started to hear from gay men across the world that they weren't accepted into traditional Wiccan covens, I was like, what covens are you joining? And the problem was I kept hearing it, like I couldn't write it off. And so it became a problem that I had to adopt, and it became a problem that I had to embrace and apply my little philosopher to. Because that was the beauty of my philosophy education as an undergrad and a master's student. I looked at that and I was like, that philosopher gives me the ability to break this thing down and understand what's really happening and why. So let's apply that to this and figure out what's actually being said. So during the course of my research, gender non-binary became popular or common or came out of the closet. However, we're going to say this that's not offensive. Gender non-binary was no longer hidden. Transgender became very prominent and was something you couldn't ignore. Um, Gender fluidity. A bunch of stuff around gender started to happen. And I looked at that and I was like, okay, see, we've got some problems here. We're using a vocabulary and trying an old vocabulary and trying to repurpose it. And people who are attached to the old vocabulary are really struggling to keep up, even if they're liberal, even if they're open-minded, even if they're willing to like meet you halfway. They're struggling with the words and the vocabulary and the fact that everything changes so quickly because people like stability, you know? And so I started to look at that and I was like, we need to start looking at things above and beyond the words. We need to look at what's really happening and we need to see it for what it actually is as opposed to what we're afraid that it is. And both sides of this debate are afraid. Both sides are, I don't want polarity because that makes me feel bad, or that makes me feel invalidated, or that makes me not feel good enough about who I am and what I'm doing. And the other side is, look, I don't want to give up polarity because it works. I'm not going to sacrifice my magic for political correctness. But both are just afraid. And so when you start to look at what's really happening and you get past the words, you start to see some wisdom in it. So one of the things that's happening is that the law of polarity is being confused with the law of gender, and the two are being mixed together as a problematic thing. Polarity itself says nothing about male or female or transcending those things or floating between them. The law of polarity exclusively says in between the two opposing poles, in between the opposites, there is power in the struggle. That's polarity. Now you can have hot and cold, black and white, top and bottom, whatever you want. You can mix these things up any way you want as long as you have two opposing stances. But male and female are not in opposition to each other. They're complementary. The male cannot do what it needs to do without the female. And I'm not talking bodies, I'm not talking men and women. I'm talking the two primordial forces of creating a human body and heterosexual sex. They can't do what they're supposed to do without each other interacting. And so they're complementary to each other. They don't stand in opposition. The god and goddess don't stand in opposition. They're part and parcel of the same whole. They're opposite sides of the same coin. For polarity to work, you gotta go the complete other way. And so when traditional witches or British traditional witches or initiatory witches, like there are so many different ways we get caught in these labels, right? But when witches, let's narrow that down. When witches say that the god is opposite the goddess, what you're talking about is positive current versus negative current, or electric energy versus magnetic energy. Those are polarity. The law of gender simply says that there's gender and that there's a male and a female. But that doesn't help us cast a spell. That doesn't help us with magic. That does something completely different. So confusing and conflating these two things is one of the biggest stumbling blocks that witches are finding to really successful magic, and specifically queer or gay or whatever label we want to throw on this, witches are really struggling with. Because if you give up polarity, you give up a very, very potent battery for power. And so I started to look at that and I was like, it's time for me to answer some questions about polarity. It's time for me to enter that fight, enter that debate, enter that discussion, and operate in it in whatever way the people I'm talking to can hear the message that I'm bringing, which is we can't give up polarity, but we can't use the 1950s heteronormative version of it either. And so I really do stand firmly in the middle of, yes, I know it's unfortunate how we have like talked about this thing, but it works. And so I don't really have a dog in the fight of what we do with it as long as the magic stays fully functional.
Hmm, cool. Yeah, look, to be honest, I still have some areas within the expression in your book around it that I still sort of struggle with, and that's all good. That's okay. It's fine. You know, in the unnamed path, we obviously, as much as I ran away from binary, I ended up in a very binary system in the unnamed path for men who love men. But having said that, uh, we do end up in an area of polarity, but its origin point comes before polarity, and that is through resonance. Where same and same, it's kind of like if you have the string on one violin and play it, that same string on another violin will also vibrate at that exact same rate. And then if you play both of those at the same time, you then get a completely different third level of that wave and energy. That is part of where we work with that energy force and that primary force. And then obviously from there, eventually those waves start to pull extremes and you start to get the ups and downs, and the polarity is born out of that, but it's actually born out of our resonance as same in that context. So that's a overly simplified version of it, but it's an area which I still find some difficulty around the labeling of male and female as the only point of birth. Yes, as humans, that's part of that experience, but in the animal form and as part of nature, no, it's actually not the only. The creation of life itself in many forms has nothing to do with male or female. Yes, there will be a positive, negative, or an active and receptive elements, and how we use that terminology and how we play with that. And I think the more that we expand beyond the terminology of male and female in that conversation is very healthy. Also, not all traditions anthropomorphize their gods. Not all witches anthropomorphize their gods. Some witches don't even have gods. So making sure that when we do talk about that power of polarity working and that it does work, so let's not throw it out, making sure that people still have an access to that outside of gender labeling, I feel is healthy. Having said that, I recognize and respect where you're sitting in this debate and how you've expressed that. I think it started a lot of conversation, especially like I brought up the book at Queer Pagan Men, the Melbourne meetup. We had a bit of a chat about that and big debates about polarity once again. But the fact that it's been discussed and it's really been deeply explored individually, not just going, oh, that's just how it is. We're actually really thinking about this, and thank you for that.
Well, yeah, thank you. Because here's the thing, and I don't want to be misunderstood. What's in Garbed in Green is not necessarily what Casey believes. Like, this is a thought experiment, which I have seen to come about bringing some real conclusions that are useful. The reason that things are written the way they are in that book is not because I personally feel any which way about any of it. The reason they're that way is because there is an overarching debate. And if this book doesn't fit into that debate, a lot of those voices that you're talking about debating my book get lost.
Mm.
If if we don't know how to fit ourselves into the stereotypical or the standard or the straight cultural debate, we get our voices get lost. And I'm tired of having my voice lost. I want the opportunity to be able to look at the law of polarity through the law of vibration like you did. Because by using some of those universal laws to offset each other, you may come up with something really, truly brilliant, like what you guys are talking about with resonance. And so that doesn't happen if you don't engage the conservative,
Yeah.
which is really unfortunate. But it's also, that's how the polarity thing works. In order to make any budge happen, in order to make any progress happen, you really have to struggle with these two opposing sides. And so the conservative witch, whoever you want to talk about, occultist, has to be in the debate or nothing changes.
Mm.
And the liberal, I'm using American terms, but like, or rather political terms, but the liberal side of this has to be in the debate or nothing changes. And only by knowing people will somebody who thinks, no, this is all about male, female, ever really make the decision, because no philosophical argument's going to do it. No plea for mercy or support or anything else is going to do it. It's going to be people loving people that make that change. And so, I really struggled with that when I was writing some of the stuff, because a lot of it was a lot more heteronormative than I wanted. But I want to give my witches the most authentic thing that I've been given so that they can build their practice authentically from there, knowing that what I've given them is effective and that it will work. So it had to start at least addressing some of those terms so that those terms could be looked at more effectively, so that those terms could be second guessed, and so that they could be kind of either vetted or ditched. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I respect that, and thank you for expressing that too. I do have to say I really enjoyed the entry into the book, exploring histories and the cultures throughout the world, and that understanding of the language that is used and not used around same gendered love and so forth throughout history. And I think that was really quite beautifully handled and really accessible as well, because some books I find get lost in that that fantasy romanticism of the queer history, and then some just don't dig deep enough and go, actually, that shit was there. Just because it's been ignored doesn't mean it wasn't there. So thank you for that, and I really admire how well you handled that. Also, when it came to the history of the pedophilia in certain cultures and where that sat in culture, I think that was beautifully, very tactfully handled as well. So thank you. And you didn't shy away from it, which is too often done. And yeah, so thank you. It's interesting hearing you talk a little bit about your journey, which is quite common in some ways for many gay men in different ways, of that internalized homophobia and that wound from what we thought our community would offer us, only to be abused by it or let down by it or still shunned and ignored by it. And particularly I find, in my experience, for queer and gay witches, that really flavors and affects the beginning of our journey of our magic and our acceptance of our magic. And, it's kind of, in the Unnamed Path, we do a lot of work before even if you go through initiation journey. The very first process in the first few months are actually all about dealing with shame, dealing with internalized homophobia, dealing with misguided understandings of toxic masculinity, all of that. And we're expected to truly answer that and unpack that and rip ourselves apart in that before we start any of the actual, well, that is the magic really, but the further advancing stages of the magic. So you have a tradition which is Gala Witchcraft.
Yeah.
Could you share with us a little bit about the Gala tradition and how those aspects of overcoming shame and internalized homophobia and etc., how you feel that is integrated in the journey or the lessons or initiatory aspects of your tradition?
Sure. So very much like you guys at the Unnamed Path, we have a dedication period. And we commemorate that with a rite of passage, a dedication ritual. Not too far unlike what I put in the book. It's a little different. It's oath bound. Like the stuff that happens in it is a little bit secretive, but very similar energetic feel to what's in the book. And that starts your process of admitting to yourself that you want this thing, and that you put that call out through the astral to like pull those things in towards yourself, right? And so a lot of the dedication period, the moving from seeker into dedicant, is about knowing yourself. It's about learning what damage or baggage you bring to the table and how to overcome that. And a huge part of it is whether we get along, whether you like me, whether I like you, whether the coven likes you and you like the coven. Because you can do all of this work, but if you don't like each other and you don't love each other and eventually trust each other, you're alone. And so there's nothing wrong with being alone. If you want to be solitary, that's perfectly lovely. But the dedication period is a chance for you to determine, are we the people you want to go through that stuff with? Are we the people you want to watch you and help you and emulate what you need, or emulate's the wrong word, reflect what you need? And so our dedication period really does a lot of that. It lets the initiator know where the dedicant is at, where the future initiate is at. It lets them know what kinds of things need to happen in order for that person to find their place in this world. And that may not be with Gala. And we're perfectly willing to accept that that is not always the right answer. Like sometimes you're going to find that you come into Gala and what we do doesn't resonate with you. You're really much more Minoan Brotherhood or Radical Fairy or Unnamed Path. There are a lot of things open to gay men, but not all of them will resonate with every gay man. And so I genuinely do try to encourage people not to make a commitment to us, like hold out as long as possible. Avoid making that commitment. Take 2-3 years. There's no like requirement it be a year and a day. That's a guideline. Take your time, really get to know me. Put me through the paces. Find out what I'm like when I'm cranky. Find out what I'm like when I woke up and didn't get my coffee. Find out what I'm like at 3 a.m. in the morning when you have to call me because you've got some weird poltergeist activity. Like, but put me through my paces, because anybody can be lovely when you're talking to them for 25, 30 minutes. Find out if I have what it takes for you to trust me, so that when the shit hits the fan for you, you know I've got your back. And so that's our dedication period, and it sort of serves the same function as what I hear you talking about with the Unnamed Path. Once you've decided where we are where you want to be, then we do a first degree. And it really is as simple as that. It's Casey, I really love what you're offering, and this feels so right, and I feel at home here. Could I get a first degree? And then we talk about where you're at and whether that would blow your life up or whether that would make your life better. And it's really very much about my higher self talking to your higher self, talking to the spirits of the tradition, using divination to find out if that's the right place for you, using spiritual counseling. It's not something that anybody's going to jump into lightly. And it's not made solely on the basis of like a popularity contest. Like just because I like you and you like me doesn't mean it's a good fit. And so what we have is an unfolding of an organic process where you get to come home if this is the place that's actually home for you. And we avoid the pitfalls as much as we possibly can, and then we hunker down when we can't.
Look, that's great advice, I think, for anyone entering the tradition, in all honesty. We do suffer a little bit from the whole Pokemon paganism, where you just got to catch them all. And the newest editions come out, so let's jump in on that kind of stuff. And and we see that, and having that real hold the mirror and check yourself stage and what's an all upfront process, I think, is very important. So, could you tell us a little bit about Gala Witchcraft? By the sounds of it, I don't want to assume that there's overlays of Wiccan structure within it. How would you describe the journey without using just Wiccan parallels?
Without using Wiccan parallels.
Or is it very strongly structured?
No, it is Wicca. So, all right. So the hard part about this is you're going to offend somebody, right?
Welcome to my world.
I believe, and I'm going to say it this way because I said it in the book and it seems to have made people happy. I have an understanding of how big capital witchcraft works within the social construct of the broader pagan community. I don't know that I'm right. I'm open to the fact that I could be wrong. But having witnessed what I've witnessed, I believe that what Wicca was originally meant to be was the organized priesthood of the old religion. That didn't mean that you had to go and get an initiation to be a witch. It meant if you wanted to be a priest, you went and sought initiation. Everybody has magic. Everybody has power. The initiation was you wanted to be indoctrinated into the system. You wanted to have a structure by which you could, I hate the word minister because it's so awfully Christian, but like we don't have a better one, minister to people who needed your help. Because that could be somebody's going to the swamp witch for a love spell. That could be somebody wants to go to the tarot reader. That could be any number of things. But it protects us in modern life. It protects us from being arrested or harmed by the state in some way for practicing something that they might consider to be snake oil sales. Because if I'm a priest and you come to my church, right? You come to my church, nobody can say anything to you. And if we do your spiritual counseling or ministering through tarot, that's just how we do, and nobody can argue it. So I view Wicca as an organized, structured religion that is federally recognized in some countries and not others to be the priesthood of the old religion, and witchcraft to be this like art or science or cunning arts. I view it to be a practice and a faith. And you could say to me, Casey, you're completely wrong. My spiritual practice is very much tied up in my herb crafting and all of these other things. And I completely hate the way you think about this. I'm open to that. But when I say somebody is Wiccan, what I really mean is there's some structured stuff that every other Wiccan's going to recognize. And Gala has that. So we have covens. We have the 3-degree structure. We go through an initiatory process. We have oath-bound materials. There is a book of shadows. Do you know what I mean? Like basic stuff. But then there's this other stuff that got grafted onto Wicca or witchcraft or the old religion or whatever way you want to spin that makes you happy. So we grafted this other thing called the male mysteries. onto it. Because one of the things that people really don't like about Wicca, or that they struggle with Wicca, is how feminine it is and how overarchingly feminine it is, to the point of almost excluding the masculine completely. The truth is, Wicca, acknowledging the law of polarity, has to embrace the male, has to embrace the masculine or the positive structure. And in more than just lip service, it has to really fully embrace it as much as it embraces the female. And so when I looked at that, I was like, all right, the male mysteries are a thing because the female mysteries are a thing. So when you enter into Gala and you get a first degree in Gala, what you're really doing is standing at the crossroads, like a Y intersection, standing at the crossroads of Wicca, the male mysteries, and then further down the line, this shamanic stuff that everything goes back to. Because at the end of the day, even a witch will tell you that most of our magic stems from a shamanic past. Now, I know borrowing the term shamanism is a bit dicey because it's an umbrella concept, but I get it. Like I'm
the unnamed path. I know exactly what you're talking about. And yes, I have long banters around my dislike of the term shamanism in our practice, but I do know what you're speaking to, and the histories of shamanic spirit flight, fetch walking, skin walking, spirit walking, all of them. They're different languages that we're using. So I recognize what you're speaking to there. Yeah.
But most of the problem with talking about this is language hasn't caught up to our creativity. And so it's not that I don't understand the broad spectrum, don't label me, or that Wicca doesn't. It's that there's no language to communicate it that doesn't agitate the problem worse. Do you know what I mean? And so I really struggled with setting up Gala the way that I did, because I didn't want anybody to ever feel the way I felt when I came out of the closet. I didn't want anybody to ever feel the way I felt when I was in the closet. And so I didn't want to do that to anybody. But in order for a tradition like Gala, or whatever Wiccan tradition you want to use, or whatever shamanic tradition you want to use, in order for it to really function, there has to be boundaries of what it does and what it doesn't do. And so what we did was we looked at the male mysteries a little bit deeper, because, male mysteries are the male mysteries, but what does that even mean? Like, if you're not going off into the woods with a talking stick, what are you talking about, Casey? Right? So I started to look at the male mysteries a little bit deeper, and I recognized you're talking about possibility. You're talking about potentiality. You're talking about light. You're talking about the blacksmith. You're talking about crossroads. You're talking about a liminality, which, for the record, witches are thrilled with. So you're talking about all of these concepts, right? And what does that actually mean? Then I looked at it and I was like, well, look, any healthy tradition of anything is going to love itself. It's going to think that it's doing good in the world. And if you want to ascribe a human construct to that, it's going to be sort of homosexual about it, right? It's going to really love itself. And so I thought to myself, if you really want to approach the male mysteries from an effective perspective, where you're really doing real work, you have to embrace the central core that is homosexuality. Because without homosexuality, what you have is therapeutic embracing of being male. But you don't have any mystery about it. Once you add in the homosexuality to that, you've got a plethora of things to discuss. Okay, how does gay sex work? Okay, why does it work that way with two men? What's happening with men where gay sex doesn't work? Why is it not working that way? What about people who are penetrative versus not penetrative? What about sex that's more cuddling than not? Where do asexuals fit into that? So you've got all of these questions that come up the moment you're no longer afraid to say the male mysteries have to include homosexuality. there has to be a central understanding of homosexuality and the male mysteries, or you're not really doing them. And the moment I looked at that, I felt really bad about myself again, because it's like, now you're excluding straight men. But you're not. You're excluding men who don't want to embrace this idea that there's a feminine in all of us, that there's a masculine in all of us. And like I said, language being language, I don't have a way around this, but that there's a positive current and a negative current, or a magnetic and an electric, right? Like these two polar opposites. But toxic masculinity, being what it is, wants to say, no, 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 I'm only male. Don't do that to me, right? And so you've got this toxic masculinity, and those are the people that are excluded from the male mysteries, because in order to embrace them, you have to give up that toxic masculinity. You have to give up caring whether anybody thinks you're gay or straight. And that's a very difficult thing for some straight men to do. And so when I realized that those were the only people that were really truly being excluded from the male mysteries, I felt a little better about it. But I still didn't feel comfortable claiming all of the male mysteries for myself or my tradition or for gay men in general, right? So I started to look at it and I said, well, let's look at just the core. Forget the external sides of the male mysteries. Let's just look at the core. And I labeled them the gay mysteries because that's all I can do. I only have an experience of living in a gay male body. I love men, right? So I only have the experience of loving men. I have the experience of trying to love women and hurting a lot of women doing it, which don't do that, right? Like, don't hurt. Wicca says don't hurt, right? It says, and it harm none. I know a lot of people aren't thrilled with the threefold law or the Wiccan creed. But every religion has some concept of that. The golden rule, the Baha'i faith has some concept of that. We all go through something that says, just don't do shitty things to people, right? And so I don't really believe there's some cosmic accountant sitting up there going, oh, Casey did this. Well, that's 3 to him, you know? But it's a good rule of thumb when running a coven. It's a good rule that says if somebody does something nice for you, do something else nice for them as quickly as possible, and if you can, do more. And that's really how, as an initiated witch, I would look at the rule of the Wiccan read, right? That's how I would look at that and not get caught up in a morality clause. And so when I started to look at my tenets of the faith, and I started to look at the tenet of tolerance and the tenet of humility, and this general guideline that is the Wiccan read, right? When I started to look at these things, I said, in good conscience, I have to label this thing differently than just the male mysteries. Because there is something happening within the gender non-binary that could still fall into the male mysteries that I'm not taking part in. And I can't eliminate that for somebody else. So I really focused on specifically the gay male mysteries. And the only reason it's male mysteries on the cover is because that's what people Google search. And that was the keywords I got told to use. But realistically, like, I look at it and I go, what are the components of homosexuality? What are the components of our relationships that really produce power and will make change in a witch's life? Let's add those to the tradition. Let's make those the things we rally around. And let's stop building our banner around what we're not and talk about what we are.
So, can you tell us, for people that might be interested in learning more about the tradition, can you give us a bit of an overview of where they might access the information, where it's actually located as well? Is it something that can be distance? Is it in person? All of those delightful questions which come up from
All right, so you can find us on Facebook at my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/HexyBeast, HEXEBEAST. You can find us on the web at www.galawitchcraft.com. I have my own webpage where I'm doing a blog, although I've been a little lax because of my move. So the blog is at CaseyGiovinco.com, and my name is probably going to be on this interview somewhere, but just in case it's
We'll have all
not,
the links down there. Yeah.
my name is spelled CaseyGiovinco, and .com is how that would be. So you can find us at any of those resources, and they will be a launch pad to get you everywhere else. Above and beyond that, yes, we do long distance training. But I'm very cautious about long distance training. I would need to be able to interact with the person like I'm interacting with you now. And we would need to have a rapport that could transcend the internet, so to speak. Scheduling is often difficult based on time zones. And I have a yearly gather that everybody comes to keep the tradition cohesive. So right now, we're not big enough to have gathers all over the country or all over the world. So we're really kind of bound into America. But for the right student who was willing to travel to America, I have no problem doing a long distance initiation anywhere in the world. Like I said, once a year, we have a grand coven where everybody gets together, and you get to see how all the other covens are doing it. You get to see other first degrees, other second degrees, other third degrees. Coven structure is very simple. It is democratic. We have a high priest, or rather a high priesthood, a high priest and his working partner, but they run the spiritual side of the coven. They are like guidance for the coven, and they lead the spiritual events, the esbats, the sabbats, spell work, anything else you want to do. They tend to the coven spirit and make sure that it's taken care of, the group mind, you might call it. And the coven itself actually leads its mundane affairs through a coven council upon which every initiated witch is a part of, including the high priesthood. Once you get to the point that you want to retire as a high priest, you have the possibility of going on and becoming an elder, and the elders run the actual tradition. And so, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it in the meantime, but basically, Gala is run by consensus of the elders, and the covens are run by consensus of the governed, so to speak. Yeah. And it's a cohesive system. We really got our structure for that from Sacred Pentagraph, which was a tradition that came off of Civil League. Tarot Star recently wrote a book, which he published in 2015, called Sacred Pentagraph. And it's a phenomenal book on witchcraft and Wicca and using the Sabbats in appropriate ways and kind of letting Wicca grow up and no longer have internal fighting. And it really is the best structure I've seen for a cohesive tradition. So I modified it a little bit. I took out the pieces we didn't need, and I kept the pieces that were essential to keeping gay men from getting really dramatic, and kind of let us be cohesive with each other and create a larger community of support.
And roughly, how big is Gala Witchcraft? How many people involved?
So we started officially. I initiated the first witch to first degree in September of 2014. I had been working with some witches prior to that since 2011. But I kind of mark September 2014 as like Gala's birth. Okay. And today, 4-ish years later, we have about 20 people who are initiated into the tradition. There are 5 covens, and they are spread out across the country. And there is a long-distance cyber coven that kind of serves as a place where people who are training remotely can meet each other and have a sense of community that is secure and protected.
Wonderful. So if people are seeking sort of more long distance from other countries, that would be the closer avenue, I guess, that would have a structure to hold them in that. So.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so, so much, Casey. We could obviously talk for a long, long time. And this has been such a pleasure to really catch up with you. And again, there is so much in your book which I'm really appreciative of, that the conversation was started around, even if I don't agree with it all. But that's okay. uh, I think you've really brought some very unique and refreshing information to the table, and really, kicked open the lid on a bunch of stuff which really hasn't been, discussed with the balls that it needed to sometimes, particularly coming from a Wiccan structure, which I'm not Wiccan and have no training in Wicca, so I have no say on that. So and that's why I was careful to say that Gala was Wicca, because I wasn't sure where the lines sit with that. So thank you.
Well, yeah, and for the record, what is Wicca and what isn't is still up for debate. Do you know what I mean? Like, I am firmly
That's a
not.
whole other interview. Yeah.
I am firmly not British traditional witchcraft because we initiate same gender.
Yeah.
But I have British traditional witchcraft training, and I recognize its value, but I also recognize the need for other things. And that's why I love what all of us are doing. Like, my stuff and yours, and how different all of them are.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so, so much, Casey. This has been really, really wonderful, and I know you're moving right now, so thank you so, so much for taking the time, and especially at such a full-on time. Hopefully we'll find an opportunity to be able to maybe do this again in the future and sort of expand some of this further. Also, if questions come up from people who watch the video on our YouTube channel, and also part of our Facebook group, Queer Pagan Men Australia, what we might do is actually gather a few of those questions, and if you're interested, we could look at either a live feed Q&A session with them over Facebook, do a FaceTime interview, or we could develop a conversation structure online anyway. But let's see what comes of it. And
All right.
yeah, thank you so, so much. You have a great evening.
You too. Have a good day.
Thank you.